evening is Bill Backalars. He has been on the faculty of Turbo University for the past 9 years, 8 of which were in the Addiction Studies program. He's also been a clinical mental health therapist for 29 years at Mayo Clinic, Franciscan, with experience in all aspects of chemical dependency treatment. Most of his clients have ranged in age from 5 to 23, and he has worked with clients with most major mental health diagnoses. Recently, he's been involved in evidence-based treatment and clinical research, currently mentoring students on research projects in addiction studies. So we welcome Bill.
I'm sitting here with people in this panel thinking about the enormous influence they've already had in my life. I'm thinking about Caitlin's table and Deb, and I have kids that I see now that I work mostly with chronically suicidal kids now, and they talk about Caitlin's table, they talk about your website. I'm aware that my youngest son, who's now 12, was at the Y at some big dance thing this weekend, and had a really good time as far as the Y Teen Center. Randy, my kids all gone to lacrosse schools, and the strength of that school system never ceased to amaze me. Officer Schott, who actually had an intervention with my middle child at one time. That was actually positive. He was being bullied, and you helped. And Heather and I kind of go back a while. She and I have cases together. And so one of the things that I like to focus on when I talk about working with kids is strength. And the strength out here that I see here and the strength that I see up here, I hope we can work that together. I'm going to start on my part of this by reading a poem, and it's by a student here at Turbo. She's a freshman, so she's just out of childhood. Her name is Rachel Murnane. The name of it is Words Unspoken. By the way, it's in the Touchstone publication done by the Turbo here. If you want to pick up a copy, there's lots of different poems and artwork inside there. Rachel writes, Words Unspoken. The words are inside of me. I could prove it to you if you'd open me up. You would see that they are right there, jailed in my ribs, stuck in my heart, trapped in my throat. But they won't pour out, not even in a way that I don't want them to. They won't spill out when I want them to the most. Not this moment, or tomorrow's, or probably not at all. They will stay there, heavy in my soul, in the back of my mind, and underneath my tongue. They'll just be out of reach, always. You will never hear me, I tell myself, as I realize that somehow I've just said all the words I've ever wanted to say to you aloud. And in my work, almost 30 years, I think it is 30 years now, I'm working with kids, I oftentimes have to remember that it's really important to look beyond the facade that kids present to me. The students that I have in here, they're all captive right now. I oftentimes talk about, kids that I work with and cases that I work with, and I'll talk about one young man who's about 15 years old. This is about 25 years ago, so my memory's kind of fading about him. But I remember being in a group therapy session, as many of us did. I was working in an inpatient chemical dependency unit, and I'll call him Sam. And I remember Sam was just one of those, you remember the movie Breakfast Club? How many people ever heard that movie? Well, it was on right about that time, and Sam had the Breakfast Club thing down like you would believe. And I remember asking him some questions in group, and he looked through his hair, and he just looked at me and he said, I am who you say I am, Bill. And I remember thinking, I don't know why the hell I do this. And it was a very interesting thing because I was so frustrated, and because I wasn't able to look beyond the facade. And I remember, and it's been many times in my career where I've said, that's it, I'm quitting, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm going to be an accountant or something. Where I run into somebody who helps me remember why I do this. One of those people, and I don't know, he might be here, is Dr. George Klonevsky was a mentor of mine at that day. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Bill? And it was right after I was with Sam. He said, you know what? Never underestimate the good that you do for these kids, okay? And about 5 years later, I ran into Sam at the place that he worked. And Sam's looking at me and he goes, Bill. And I recognized him, but because of confidentiality, we have to be careful. And he says, "You remember me?" And I go, "Sam, I don't think I could ever forget you." And he started talking to me about these groups that we've done and things that I'd said and things that we talked about. And he said, "I didn't get it then. But I got it a couple years later, and at this point he was involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was recovering, he was doing very well." And I remember walking away thinking, that's why I do this. That's why I do this, okay? And so, I encourage people, especially with kids, especially with teenage kids, to look beyond what they present to you. Most of the kids that I deal with start out very angry. And if I respond to them in terms of their anger, I lose them almost immediately. And so I encourage us, as we talk about compassion towards youth, to make sure that we look beyond what we see. The other thing that I really encourage that we think about as we talk about these conversations is that we need to look at our kids in terms of strength. One of my favorite clients of all time, I'm going to call him Joe. Joe had parents who were involved in divorce and were extremely, extremely angry with each other. And oftentimes he was struggling with issues of depression and things like that. Joe was about 10 or 11, so he was very young. And he was just kind of befuddled by his parents' battles and things like that. And so I had Joe in with his parents, and they immediately began accusing each other of various things, and I just told him, stop, okay? And I said, "I'm going to sit here and I'm going to talk to Joe," and I sent him out of the office. And I let them know that they needed to work on that because it was messing him up. And so I was talking to Joe, and after we left the room, I go, "Joe, what was that like for you?" And he said, "You know what, Bill? It's like I'm walking down the street, and somebody throws a rock at me. And I turn around and I look at them, and there's some kid standing there that have just thrown this rock at me. And I think to myself, if I throw it back at them, I'm getting in trouble. If I don't do something, then they're just never going to leave me alone. So the only thing I can think to say is, hey, did one of you guys lose this?" And it really underscored for me the strength that this little kid had about dealing with some of the things that he was struggling with. And I think that's important because in looking at the strength that our kids have, and those are the things that we use that will help them take care of the things that don't work very well. So I encourage us tonight as we talk in these conversations to focus on strength. I mean, let's face it. Most of us wonder how the heck we got to the age we're at now. How do we get through it all? But most of us do, okay? And it's because of our strengths that we're able to do that. And so I'm hoping to kind of conclude is that, number one, that we look through the facade. That our kids, I very rarely meet a kid that I really believe, I would say probably 1 out of 100 who really doesn't care. Because kids who care too much look exactly the same as kids who don't care. So look through the facade. And number two, focus on the strengths, because that's where our hope comes from. And that's the kind of things that we need to instill upon them to help them get through the problems that they're having. Thanks a lot.